stuff, just some things that I've learned along the way, and hopefully it's useful, some bits of advice and that kind of thing, and then I can take some questions at the end, like Deborah said. So I found this funny photo of me at university. So I started off at Sheffield. I did mechanical engineering, starting in 2005, and thought I was really cool, basically. So we hung around in skate parks and rode BMXs and that kind of thing. And this is, what I've ended up doing with a PhD, and then as a postdoc for about 2.5 years. Started as a lecturer in Liverpool in 2015, and then senior lecturer in about 2019, I think. So it's interesting. The thing I want to say here is it almost, probably the worst bit of this was the degree, or maybe just before it. So that was very close to where my academic career stopped. So I was like a carer before I got to here, and when I got to university and experienced the sort of freedom, went a little bit off the rails and spent my time hanging around in skate parks and stuff, and got a letter from Sheffield at some point saying you really need to do some work, and I only just made it through, I think, the second year. So I kind of wanted to show that, because one of the sort of messages that I wanted to get across is the idea that some of these things are kind of out of our hands, really, sort of personal circumstances and that kind of stuff. And so you might have like a plan for where you want to go, but it can be sort of nudged on a different course because of all kinds of reasons that are out of your control, and I think that's totally fine. So I did my PhD was in nonlinear dynamics. So what we're trying to do here, some random pictures that I found, we were trying to generate electrical energy from bridge vibrations, and we were trying to see if we could generate more energy by making these energy harvesting devices non-linear, basically. And so lesson number 2 is it basically didn't work. It was kind of a dead end in a lot of ways. And for a PhD, that's okay, that can happen. And we were able to sort of demonstrate that this probably wasn't worth doing in quite a rigorous way. And so a failure, showing that something doesn't work, is still science, and that's all right. So then I became a research associate. So I worked for a year, kind of on Sheffield had like a 1-year fellowship scheme. Then after that, I joined a program grant for a while. So then I sort of changed course a bit because I was kind of not into this stuff anymore. I had the chance to. So then I got into uncertainty quantification, basically, and tuning models, the parameters in models, and working out how uncertain we are about them. And then moved to Liverpool in 2015, and basically I didn't know anyone. I've just kind of felt a bit isolated, really. So I tried to meet as many people as I could, and in particular I got on really well with the manufacturing group, and I'd started doing some AI stuff by then. So then went in a totally different direction again and started doing additive manufacturing, and here we are using some AI stuff to try and predict porosity in AM builds, basically. And I also made some friends in aerospace, and so here we've got an AI model of a helicopter pitch rate in response to the pilot wiggling the stick, basically. So Sarah Sharples, who's the PI on this grant on Connected Everything 2 and 1, has already done one of these talks, so this is totally worth looking at one of those. And she said that she's jumped across lots of different disciplines lots of times, and it's a bit messy, and I absolutely echo that completely. I don't regret moving around, but I've moved around quite a lot, and it's quite difficult to it's a messy CV, basically. I've got some text on that later. And then just very, very recently, so this is in May 2021, I've started doing more private consultancy. So I'm now 80% consultant and 20% senior lecturer at Liverpool. So another sort of another change in direction. I'm happy to do. So I'm mostly talking about this stuff. So I'm happy to talk about this bit at the end, if you like as well. So PhD to lecturer. Sorry about the boring slides. It's really just to remind me what I wanted to say. So I was really well supported during my PhD. I had an excellent supervisor, Neil Sims, and I was also supported by Keith Worden. He wasn't one of my supervisors, but helped me out a lot as well. And you know, without them, it could have been very, very different. So again, it's one of those things. It's kind of out of your control, but it's really important during your PhD to be well supported. And all you can do really is if you get into a position where you are now able to supervise PhD students, is you just do your best to be that person, because without it, I think it's probably quite difficult to make progress. So that certainly helped me an awful lot. I'm very grateful to them. And then I became a research associate. So this is after my PhD. And this is hard, I think, and it's not always that clearly sort of stated. You'd kind of think perhaps at the time, once you've got your PhD, you're kind of all right, a bit more settled. The problem with being a research associate is it's all part-time contracts, and they're on completely different topics. So it can be quite difficult to switch between them, and the lack of job security can be quite stressful. It's good to be a research associate for a little while if you want to apply for a lecturer position, just because it gives you the chance to establish yourself a bit separately from your PhD supervisors. So when you apply for a lecturer position, universities don't want to see like a replica of the supervisor. Basically, they want to see, you know, a new person with their own ideas and stuff, which I'm sure you'll have, but it's about demonstrating that. So doing a postdoc I would, you know, recommend it at least for a bit, rather than going straight from PhD to applying for a lectureship position. But it's difficult, and it can be, I've heard, time limited. The longer you spend as a postdoc, after well, you know, a certain time, it can be harder to get a lectureship position. So I've been told probably maybe 2 to 3 years of postdocing is kind of about the right time, and that's not really fair, basically, because you could just be unlucky. But people start to ask why you haven't made the transition yet and that kind of thing. And one of the messages I want to, like I say, get across is if that happens and it's just bad luck, then that's absolutely fine. And there's plenty of other interesting things that, you know, that you can do. But it's definitely difficult, and it's not fair, a lot of it. So just to be clear, so I don't get into trouble, I'm drawing on my experience and the experience of the people that were around me at the time, because there was a group of us all going through trying to find an academic position. There's often background politics at work that's completely out of your hand. So you don't know if a particular institution is advertising for a position, but really they've got someone internal that they want to give it to already. I know of people who were applying for lectureships and have emailed a senior person in said institution and said, this looks like it'd be good for me, what do you think? And the response was, you can apply, but I think it was, you'll be subject to very strong internal competition, which basically means we're giving it to someone that we already know. And that's not fair at all. It shouldn't happen. And hopefully it doesn't anymore, but it probably does. And there's nothing you can really do about that, I think, when you're in that position. And yeah, it's definitely, you hear of sort of conversations happening between institutions before people apply. And if you don't, sometimes, I guess, if you don't know the right people, you just, you know, you get rejected, and I got rejected plenty of times, and you just have no idea why, really. But again, there's nothing you can do about that. So if it doesn't work out, then, you know, I was quite prepared at the time to just go and do something else. And I think I would have had lots of fun and done lots of interesting stuff outside of academia if I hadn't have got a lectureship at that point. You also might have to move, and that's really difficult as well. So we moved from Sheffield to Liverpool, and to do that, my partner left a job that she loved, basically, so that we could go to Liverpool, which is an amazing thing to do. Extremely generous, and we left all our friends as well. We had to sort of make new friends and all that kind of stuff. And if she had, you know, quite rightly said, I don't really want to move, I love my job, then I probably wouldn't have got an academic position, and you know, that would have been fine. That's just how it is, you know. People are more important than anything really. So like I say, I'm sure would have gone on to do something else that's interesting. So there's all these kind of forces at work that are external to what you yourself do, and you just kind of got to adapt to what you've got, I think. So yeah, that's what I've learned from that process. Is it's often when you're in the sort of academic bubble, sometimes, you know, people describe not getting a permanent position as sort of failing, and it's just not the case. It's just how things go sometimes, and there's a whole other world of stuff if it doesn't work out. And if you're into, you know, research and science, there's plenty of other ways to do that, basically. So I was a lecturer for a bit, then senior lecturer, like I said, I think in 2019. So this was quite, at least for the first couple of years, was quite bleak, to be honest, because I came to Liverpool and I didn't know anyone really. And for the first, it's quite embarrassing, for the first couple of months, my partner was still in Sheffield, and everyone in this group that I was in had gone to a conference, and there were days when I was cycling in, so I wasn't getting the bus, and I'd sit in the office and then cycle home, and I realised I hadn't said anything. I hadn't interacted with a person at all. I just didn't know anyone. It was pretty bleak, really. So I tried really hard, and I tried to meet as many people as I could, and that's how I met the manufacturing group. And they kind of put a new perspective that I hadn't seen before. They were more applied. They were applying for patents and stuff, and I thought that's pretty cool. So they sort of set me off on a different path, really. But that's networking, basically. Networking is a thing you do need to do. I've never found it particularly easy. And so the thing I've written there is introverts can network. So by that I mean, in my case, I think I can meet people and get to know them, and that's absolutely fine. And I like people. By introvert, I mean if for example I'm upset about something, I'd rather be on my own, if you know what I mean. That's where I sort of recharge. So I'm not sort of naturally inclined to networking, but you know, it's just meeting people eventually. And the thing with academics, and if you go to meet industry people as well, they're all doing interesting stuff, so it kind of gets easier. And I don't think you need to know lots of people, so I certainly don't. I'm not actually very well connected, to be honest. You just need you meet some people that you get on with really well, and you trust them, and you really don't need many of them at all. You just need a few sort of really good mates eventually, that you can rely on and work with really well. So you don't need to know everyone. And a bit of self-promotion does help. So you don't want to be arrogant about it, and actually for a lot of us it makes us feel quite uncomfortable. But it is also, you know, you should be proud of the stuff that you've achieved, of papers and things like that, and talk about them to people. You know, it's okay to be proud of the work that you've done. And you know, a lot of the time, if you don't sort of promote yourself, no one else will. So even at a university, you have your review probably once a year, and they'll ask you what you've been up to, because they won't know. So unless you say, no one's ever going to know, really. Funding. So the big change when you become a lecturer is you've got to secure funding now. I've not really done very well as a principal investigator, and I know Sarah made this point as well. I've done much better as a co-investigator, and I think it's partly because I've ended up between a load of different disciplines. I can support a lot of different projects, and that's okay. You don't have to be a really successful PI. You can be good at being a co-I. I think that's absolutely fine, especially these days. There's more of a drive to make academia a bit less siloed. You need to get advice. This is really important. Get it from the right people. So I got a lot of advice about writing grants from people who meant well, but I realised later on didn't write any grants. And so the advice was wrong, basically, and they're trying to help, which is fair enough. But it's really important that you find someone who is good at writing grant applications to tell you how to write good grant applications. Sounds obvious, but it's not always so clear. And writing grants is quite fun. So often it's people talk about it like it's a bit of a burden, but actually it's a chance to be quite creative, I think. So that's worth bearing in mind. When you're writing papers, you're actually quite constrained, mostly because we're trying to guard against what the reviewers are going to say. So we're super precise. But as grants, you can be pretty hand wavy, and you can say, you know, we're going to change the UK's manufacturing sector. We're going to do this, this and this and reduce carbon, and you can be really quite adventurous, and you know, it's quite fun really. Once you accept that, they're a lot easier to do. So burnout is a thing. I don't like the word burnout because I think it almost implies blame on the individual, as in other sectors, if there's, rather than saying there's lots of burnout, you'd say there's lots of staff turnover, which would imply there's something wrong with the sector. So, you know, it's just a point I want to make, but it's definitely a thing, and you've got to be really careful about it because academia can be quite high pressure. So when I started as a lecturer, I had this, my idea was that I'd get up like at 6 in the morning or something, and then I'd have 3 hours for research time, and then I'd start doing my sort of admin stuff and teaching at 9 o'clock and then work till 5. And if I could just go back in time, I would just be screaming at myself that that's completely unsustainable. It's never going to work, and you're going to end up exhausted, basically. So you've got to be really careful of that. It's easy to kind of slip into that trap. It helps me having so my partner's not an academic, and so she was quite good in saying that's odd. That's an odd thing to do. And you might be around in academia, you might be around people who are working extremely long hours, but it's not normal. And so it's really good if you've got, however you do it, it's good to sort of look outside sometimes and say, well, just sort of double check yourself. Is this something that I really should be doing? And at the same time, we're subject to a lot of reviews of everything. So we're reviewed on grants, papers, teaching, everything. And most of it is completely unfiltered. So it's pretty, some of it's pretty harsh. Student feedback can be pretty harsh, even if you've done a good job. I've had student feedback that's been really nasty, and it's actually been for another lecturer and they've just got the wrong module. So there's, you know, but I only realised that later. I had, I don't know, I've had grant feedback that said this applicant's their track record is nothing to be proud of, something like that. There's not a lot you can do about that except just know that it's coming and try to, you know, be robust to it however you can. And again, it's the PhD supervisor thing, really. You just make sure that when it's your turn to review stuff, it's not payback time, you know, just sort of, it's your chance to be reasonable, and then you can try and make a difference that way. You will also get the chance now to supervise PhD students, and this is probably the best bit of the job, I think, because you'll never get to see someone sort of grow as much. So you get it with undergrads a bit, but PhD students really change an awful lot. So if you can be a good supervisor, it's extremely rewarding. I think I made some mistakes. I've made loads of mistakes with PhD supervision. I think initially I expected too much, basically. So, you know, it's important to remember once you've done the PhD, and it was a few years ago, it's quite you can forget what it's like quite quickly, I think. But really, it's training, and mostly what you're doing is you're training an individual, and that's quite an important thing to remember. They're the output, not papers and stuff. And don't overshoot. So I ended up, partly because someone left and I got all of their students. At one point I had 9 PhD students, and that was too many basically. So you need to kind of gauge how many PhD students you would like to supervise, I think, because you need to make sure that you can provide enough support for them. So yeah, another mistake that I made there. So, okay, you're a lecturer and perhaps you'd like to survive and perhaps you want to get confirmed in post so that you're permanent. And at Liverpool, I think it's a 3-year probationary period. So it's quite a long time. And then perhaps you want to become a senior lecturer. So this is some stuff that I learned along the way. So teaching, it depends. So again, this is not a specific institution, but certainly in some teachings, they might say it's a priority, but it's kind of not compared to funding, research funding. But it should be, and it doesn't mean that should stop you if you are working somewhere like that, because it's extremely rewarding and the students are paid to be there and they deserve good teachers, and it doesn't feel good to not give that 100%, I think. You've got to be a bit careful with unfair teaching allocations. So I've seen this happen loads of times, particularly to new staff in new institutions. They might be giving modules that are actually known to be really, really difficult, that no one else wants. So you've just got to be really careful with that. You can say, I don't want to do this because it's outside my area or there's no material. So I certainly have been given a module with an awful lot of students and the lecturer had left and there was no material at all. It was really, really difficult for a couple of years. If you get given a new module, it's tempting to change it a lot because you want to make it good. I'd advise don't do that, basically, at least for the first year, because you just don't know how a particular cohort will react to those changes. It's very difficult to predict. So I'd recommend just teaching it pretty much as it is. And then if you get bad feedback, then that's fine. In your review, you can just say, I left it as it was to see how it was going to work. And now I can see what the problems are. So I'm going to make some small changes. So don't get into making huge changes straight away. That can be really time consuming and ultimately it can go the wrong way. So I've been given new modules and I made huge changes and they all hated it, basically. And when you're designing assessments, think about how long they're going to take to mark, because this is a huge time sink potentially. You've got to be really efficient with your time as a lecturer, and if you end up setting a cohort of 250 students, you ask them to write a 10-page report each, you'll be marking those for the rest of your life, basically. So just bear that in mind. You'll be given an admin job, so administration. People moan about admin quite a lot. It doesn't have to be bad, to be honest. I've had a few different admin jobs and they're always interesting if you choose to look at them that way, basically. I don't mind admin as long as it feels like it's making a difference. I think you can usually find something good about it and get quite into it, really. Again, be a little bit aware of unfair admin allocations. So if something does look overwhelmingly difficult for you, it's really important to say so. It's difficult to do when you're a new lecturer, but it's worth doing. And ask for training. So this winds me up a lot, actually. Quite often in universities, you get given a new admin job and you have to learn it as you go, and there's absolutely no training for it at all. So you end up with, you basically do a bad job for at least a couple of years until you've understood everything that you're supposed to be doing, and that really isn't how it should be. And often there are people around who could probably give you training in it. They're just very busy. So you've got to ask for it. And if you ask for it, then most people are quite happy to give you advice about how these administrative positions work. Initially, I was a bit timid, so I didn't ask anyone. I just had no idea what I was doing, really. So funded projects. So eventually, you'll win some money with a bit of luck. So something that Sarah said as well, make the most of the projects. So you don't need loads and loads of projects and loads of money. I think you just need a few good projects. My first one was with Connected Everything 1 and Renishaw, and so that was an additive manufacturing project, and that was my first sort of significant bit of funding, and I just put everything into that to make sure that it worked, because I sort of realised that that was an opportunity to really build a connection with a new company, and also with Connected Everything, and that was the right thing to do. I think is to once you get it, is to really maximise it, and we've still got a really good relationship with Renishaw now, and this work actually has led to another PhD, and that has led to a patent which I've never done before, which got submitted yesterday, which is very exciting. So it all it's absolutely worth doing. And the final thing here is about adapting. So I think I've said I've sort of changed disciplines lots and lots of times, not always deliberately. To me, I think almost anything is interesting. Any sort of scientific discipline, and outside of science, I can quite easily get into anything, really. So that's not a problem, and actually that's been quite useful, because it meant that after my PhD, which was a little bit of a dead end, I was able to turn to something else, which I thought was important. And likewise, coming to Liverpool, I was able to start doing manufacturing stuff because I got on well with that group. And I think it would have been really difficult for me to sort of survive, really, if I hadn't been able to adapt. And I've really enjoyed doing it as well. So just sort of be prepared to look outside your immediate area, I think. It's almost our jobs to be out of our comfort zones pretty much all the time, really, research wise. That's kind of the point, I think, of academia. The cross-disciplinary stuff isn't very easy though. So, funding bodies want it, but there's a whole load of practical stuff that makes it quite difficult that you just need to be aware of. So where do papers go if they bridge two disciplines? What conferences do you go to? What pots of money should you apply for? And it can make that a bit more difficult. Like Sarah said, it can make your CV a bit messy, but ultimately, I think it's the right thing to do. You adapt to the research that you think is most important at the time, and in the long run, it's completely worth doing. Okay, so the final bit. So I've got a load of bike pictures here. Why? So I love cycling, and I joined a cycling club when I came to Liverpool, and made a load of friends that way. And it's really good. It's a really good thing to do, because I think it's quite easy to get sort of not stuck, but it's difficult to look outside of the academic bubble, I think, and associated with that are all the titles like doctor and lecturer and senior lecturer and that sort of stuff. And then if I go out with the cycling club and there's a new person there and they say, well, what do you do? And you say, oh, I'm a senior lecturer or whatever. They don't care. Basically, they don't care what that means. You're just like another guy to them, and that's great, and it's really refreshing, and it's just really good to look outside of that bubble basically any way that you can. So I know people that do five-a-side football and they love it for exactly the same reason, because then it's people you don't know from work, and you can talk about anything basically, and that's been really, really helpful. I put the cat in the bottom right hand corner as well, because she doesn't care what I do either, as far as I can tell. And yeah, just be prepared that your priorities will change possibly quite a lot. So for me, as a PhD student, all I wanted to do was publish a paper in the Journal of Sound and Vibration. That was what my whole life was about. after that, I wanted to do a solo author paper. Then when I became a lecturer, I wanted to, it was all about winning funding. And then, these days I'm much more on the sort of applied side, sitting between academia and industry, and I'm not that bothered about papers anymore. I write them if I've got something to say. But what motivates me now is very much trying to get stuff out of academia and into the real world and seeing it make a difference. And I didn't really see any of that coming. So yeah, I guess just be ready for those priorities to change. And I think that's completely fine. And yeah, I think that's about all I wanted to